Hi, I'm Phil the Blythe, Basement Goblin, Ecstatic Forager, and Hellenic Polytheist. So, my last video was all about sacred spaces, altars, and shrines. If you want to check that out over here. Today's video is kind of what you do at those sacred spaces, namely offerings. Offerings are probably one of the most important aspects of Hellenic polytheism. As I mentioned in my first video way back when, one of the biggest concepts in Hellenism is called charis. It's this idea of reciprocity, give and take. Do ut des, somewhere. A Latin student just cried. That basically means I give so that you may give. At its most basic, an offering is a sacrifice, something that we are giving to a divine entity as a form of supplication. It can be for a few reasons: to give a gift in hopes of getting future blessings, to give a gift in thanks of past blessings, or just to acknowledge and thank them in an expression of adoration and worship. So to give you a contemporaneous account, here's an account from Theophrastus and On Piety. One must sacrifice to the gods for 3 purposes: to give honor, to show gratitude, or because one is in need of good things. When we give a gift to the gods in charis, they rejoice in these gifts. These gifts can be libations, dedications, hymns, dances, really anything at all that you're specifically or doing for a divine entity can be considered an offering. So I'm not really going to be discussing the why of an offering, because then we're going to start getting into a little bit of philosophical territory, and this is a 101 series. I think the philosophy and the theory behind these things is a little more of like a 102 or beyond. So I'm not going to touch that, but I am going to give you a few quotes to mull over as I discuss offerings. So these are from Walter Burkert's Greek Religion. In human society, the exchange of gifts is a social process of the first order. Through giving and receiving, personal bonds are forged and maintained, and relations of superiority and subordination are expressed and recognized. If the gods are the stronger ones, and also the givers of good, then they have a claim to gifts. First quote. Second quote about the sort of whys and theory behind offerings. This is not an exchange of gifts celebrated by a hierarchical society of gods, priests, and commoners. Together, at the same level, men and women stand here about the altar, experience and bring death through sacrifice, honor the immortals, and in eating affirm life in its conditionality. It is the solidarity of mortals in the face of the immortals. Confused yet? Yeah, that's why I'm not getting to philosophy in this video. But I think it's important for you to have that in sort of the background of your mind as you're thinking about these things. So skirting around the why, and after addressing the what, let's address a little bit of the how of offerings in the form of what are the types of offering. So I am going to name 5 different types of offerings. Now their designation is a little arbitrary, and some of them can be like part of the others, and some people might have different opinions on like what is the type of offering. I'm not gonna get into the semantics of why I chose to call these offerings these 5 different types of offerings. You might have your own categorization, but humans like lists, and this is the list that I'm working with. So, without further ado, the following are the types of offerings that I will be discussing. First fruit offerings, libations, burnt offerings, votive offerings, and immaterial dedications. First fruits. These offerings are pretty much exactly what they sound like. They are the firstlings of a harvest, whether that is hunting, agriculture, fishing, or gathering. They are then set upon a sacred space where they are either left to the elements, whether that's other people, animals, or just the decomposition of nature itself. They were also sunk into bodies of water, buried in the ground, or burned. So as part of first fruit offerings, I'm going to be including tithes. So I'm including tithes in this category because they are a portion of something that is given usually before you reap the benefits of whatever it is that you have received. Tithes can be money, they can be other non-food offerings. Traditionally, a tithe was a 1/10 of what you had received. For example, in battlefield spoils, it wouldn't just be money, it would be cauldrons, tripods, other types of gold, jewelry. However, tithing doesn't have to be 1/10 of something. Not all of us have that much to spare. Most people I know figure out what is reasonable to them, but still feels like a sacrifice. I'm gonna get into how this looks in the modern day and age a little bit later, as I usually do. Speaking of burning things, burnt offerings are one of the most commonly seen forms in sacrifice and offerings in general. Many times this would be a part of an animal that one cannot consume, such as bones or certain organs. However, this wasn't always the case. It could also be a portion of the meal, meat or no meat, that was set aside for the god and then later burned. There's even the thinking that the mere releasing of steam of a hot-cooked meal could be considered an aroma that feeds the gods. Once the food is cool, that means the gods have taken what they need from that offering, and it is now yours to eat. Additionally, barley groats are a super common thing that is like always burned. It's always like them sprinkling it over a fire or another sacrifice. Barley groats, another big thing. They're kind of hard to find here, at least where I am. I don't know why. You can order them online. Incense. So I'm including incense in the burnt offering category because it's something that you literally burn. It was another very common and at the time often fairly cheap form of offering. The traditional forms of incense would be things like frankincense and myrrh at that time. However, it also included aromatic spices, so that could be something like bay laurel or another evergreen like cedar or pine, or other aromatic herbs. Libations. Libations are attested all over the freaking place. Like every 5 seconds in the Iliad and the Odyssey, someone is making a libation. They were just something pretty much anytime you consumed wine. You have to keep in mind at this time too, water wasn't always the best, especially when it was not from this stream is for sure safe. I work in historical New England, and people are always like, oh, were people super drunk back then because they were always drinking beer? No, their beer was basically just like beer-flavored water. There was like barely any alcohol content in there, and it was pretty much the alcohol was just so, water kind of sucked back then. So anyway, I digress. So libations. This would be mixed or unmixed wine mixed with water. Today, all of our wine, at least here that I can have access to, all of our wine is mixed all of our wine is already mixed with water, so can't really make that distinction there. At its most basic, libation is a consumable liquid that is poured upon the ground. Pretty much any occasion that the ancient Greeks found to make a libation, they would, whether that's a funeral, a celebration, a party, or a private prayer. All were occasions for a libation. While libations often included wine, in fact, the word today, libations, usually refers to alcohol, it could also be other things too. It was often things like milk, honey, oil, or even water. When looking at the Odyssey, when Odysseus attempts to summon the dead, he offers them 3 things. First, he makes an offering of honey. Then, he makes an offering of wine. And then finally, he makes an offering of water. He sprinkles barley groats and then makes a vow of future burnt offerings. One of the most detailed accounts of libation rituals we have actually comes from Oedipus at Colonus by Sophocles. It takes place in the Grove of Eumenides. It's thought to be some sort of purification or absolution ritual, because if you know the story of Oedipus, I guess got a lot to atone for. Here's a quote. My camera got moved. It's fine. First, water is fetched from a freshly flowing spring. Cauldrons which stand in the sanctuary are garlanded with wool and filled with water and honey. Turning towards the east, the sacrificer tips the vessel towards the west. The olive branches which he has been holding in his hand, he now strews on the ground at the place where the earth has drunken the libation. And with a silent prayer, he departs, not looking back. And if you know the story of Oedipus at Colonus, you know that pretty much immediately after that, Oedipus disappears. Most people don't know this, not to go on another tangent. Most people think the story of Oedipus ends with him because, him and his mom. However, what most people don't actually know is Oedipus' story doesn't end sadly. He imposes a self-exile, and then he actually, reaches enlightenment, and he, ascends into heaven. He just literally is walking along, and he's like, it is time to die now. And he, offers all this, wise words to his daughter. It's, real weird. Most people think that the story of Oedipus ends with, all of that, but it actually doesn't. It ends pretty, happily as it could end for a guy like him. Yeah, ends with him ascending. Wild stuff. Anyway, this is not a discussion by Oedipus, so I'll leave that to Freud. So libations were not always as intense as that ritual was. It could be something as simple as tipping wine onto the ground at the beginning of a party as thanks. And sometimes it was oil poured over a sacred rock at a crossroads, or even water poured onto a grave. They are very diverse and unique. Pretty much libations were made to fit every situation imaginable. Votive offerings. The votive offering is a gift made to an entity as a result of a vow. That's the basic of it. As I mentioned in my first video,
if you do X, I'll do Y.
The votive offering is the Y in this scenario. It is the thing that you are giving once your request has been fulfilled. Votive offerings have been a goldmine for archaeologists because, unlike food or libations, votive offerings have, for the most part, withstood the test of time in the thousands of them. Votive offerings were unique to the worshiper, and they were often offered and dedicated to specific gods, specific epithets, even very, very specific local heroes. There were things like clay artifacts, weapons, tools of the trade, pottery, art, jewelry, even sanctuaries and altars could be votive offerings. Pretty much anything, I would argue physical, that was offered as a consequence of a vow could be considered a votive offering. There was even an example I found of a roof tile being dedicated to a god. I think that's pretty funny. I, for one, love votive offerings. I'm a notorious trinket hoarder, and, that's pretty much what votive offerings are. Just giving trinkets of meaning. Whatever that meaning is for you, you offer that to an entity as, thanks for something that they did for you. And finally, we come to immaterial dedications. So it wasn't just physical things that were offered, but also acts. Things like hymns, dances, songs, games, and competitions. All of these things are commonly seen throughout antiquity. As I said, I'm going to get more into the modern considerations of all of this, but immaterial dedications are one of the best ways to make an offering, especially if you're in a situation where you can't exactly be open. You'll notice there's a pretty big one that I did not cover, and that would be animal sacrifice. Animal sacrifice is seen all throughout the ancient world. It's not a unique thing. And I would say next to libations, animal sacrifice is probably the most commonly seen in contemporaneous literature. However, it is not super relevant to practicing Hellenic polytheists today. I'm not going to get into the morality of animal sacrifice, but just know that it was kind of inseparable from sacrifice in the ancient world, so you'll see a lot of it. Today, you could theoretically offer meat you buy or other animal byproducts if that's something you want to do, but by no means is animal sacrifice a prerequisite to worship. So now it's time to get more into that Chthonic versus Ouranic sacrifice that I keep talking about in every video so far, because they did differ a lot, and this is one of the most important differences to watch out for. So as I mentioned, offerings to Chthonic deities would be put on the ground on low altars or in the ground. Offerings to Ouranic deities will be above the ground. In the case for burnt offerings for Ouranic deities, usually the fire would be raised up too, and this would be done in an open space where the smoke would go and directly float up to the gods or whatever they thought happened to it. However, as you might know, our houses are not the same as ancient Greek houses where they had a lot of open ventilation, and especially in their main cooking and eating areas. So for me, I'll try to do the dedication near an open window. However, I really don't get bent out of shape about it. We're modern people living in a modern world. We have to deal with these things. Additionally, you do not share food with chthonic entities. Ever. The easy way to think about it is chthonic entities get the whole, and Ouranic deities get the portion which you then share with them. Do not make an entire meal for a chthonic entity if you don't intend on offering them the entire thing. Don't offer an apple if you don't intend on offering the entire thing. Now, there is a lot of theory behind this, mostly to do with miasma. It was this idea of because you were offering something to the dead, it then comes in contact with death, which then if you ingest, pollutes you. And if you are polluted, then you got to do some work to clear out that pollution before it is considered pious to then reapproach the gods. Someone once asked me why I think that we share food with the Ouranic deities. Now, I have my own opinions on this, and I won't be getting into them in this video, because again, we're getting into the realm of philosophy. But that's something that you might want to consider when you're offering something. Always ask why. Why am I offering them a portion? What does it signify? What does it symbolize? I'll definitely get into that in another video when I touch more upon more theoretical and advanced topics, but just something to think about. There's also a difference in terms of libations. For chthonic entities, you would pour the entire libation jug directly onto the earth, and you were not to drink from it. For Ouranic entities, however, it was usually a portion was poured from the jug onto another bowl, which was then poured onto the ground. So they both ended up on the ground, but for the Ouranic ones, the main difference was that there was like another jug. And you can often see this in pottery where they're kind of like standing like this. That's what they're doing. They're making a libation. And then often at the end of that initial libation, you would then share a drink with the entity. There's also a bunch of complicated discussion surrounding like what direction you face and what time should you do it. I don't really get into all that because I barely know my cardinal directions, especially at like any given moment. Yeah, I don't usually make a distinction between if I offer to chthonic in the morning versus at night. I just go with where the spirit moves me. And now we're going to get into some modern considerations because we're all modern people. At least I presume none of us are time travelers. If you're a time traveler, you legally have to tell me. First fruits. Now, if you garden or if you forage, this one's very self-explanatory. Offer the first fruits from your garden. Offer the first little portion from your foraging outing. Offer the first bits of your herbs. Pretty self-explanatory. Not all of us are gardeners or foragers or indoor herb aficionados. Is that the herbalist? No. So now you can get a little more creative. Can you tithe? Spare $1 out of your paycheck and donate it to some cause that means something to you. What about other donations? I personally have donated books and clothes as an offering to a deity. Can you offer first fruits of your creative endeavors? Something if you make candles or incense, can you set aside the first batch for whatever entity that you are offering to? Or even simpler, when you go to the grocery store, can you pour a tiny bit of milk onto the earth or offer a slice of bread? Now, you don't have to do this for like every single thing you do. That would be bananas. Probably more wasteful than it would be considered sacrificial. Take 2. But if you're looking for first fruit ideas, I hope some of that was helpful, and if you have any others, please feel free to post them down in the comments. Burnt offerings. Now, if you're coming from a witchcraft space, you know that incense is the best. You might already burn incense. It's a wonderful, wonderful offering. I offer incense all the time. I have so much incense. And it's probably one of the best ways to engage with burnt offering, especially if you don't have safe access to fire. Burning bay leaves are another historical and easy offering. However, you don't have access to either of these things, or if you're trying to keep your practice on the DL, or you just don't have the ability to burn anything, one of my favorite other forms of aromatic offerings is steam. For example, every morning I dedicate the steam of my coffee to Athena before work. All it requires is I literally just make coffee, pour it, say a mental prayer, and boom, an offering. I will also offer the steam that comes off of my dinner to Hestia or Demeter, and just mental prayer. Hey, this is for you. I offer this to you, Demeter. I offer this to you, Hestia. Boom. Offering. Libations. While often wine, not everyone has access to wine or wants to purchase wine. As I've mentioned, honey, milk, water, and oil are all wonderful examples of libations. You could even do grape juice or oat milk for substitutions. I actually made a hot toddy once. It was probably one of the most amusing forms of libations that I've made. Get creative. If it is a consumable liquid, it can be a libation. Coffee, tea, sparkling water. If you can drink it, you can pour it. Libation. Votives! As I mentioned, votives are one of my favorites. I'm a very creative person, and I also just love collecting and creating random things, so I do votive offerings a lot. I'm actually going to show you some of mine. Okay, so this here is a little libation jug that I made to sort of replicate a life-size one, and I now use it as an incense holder. Here, you can probably guess what this is just by looking at it. It's Hermes' helmet. I made this as part of a prayer. I made it out of polymer clay. Another Hermes votive. This one I made out of stamps, because, messenger. Thought it was funny. And then here, I made it into a little postcard, so I actually included a stamp and addressed it to Mount Olympus. I cracked myself up for one. Here's a book from 1914 that I got for $20 at a store. This was another votive, this one to Athena, and I just think first of all, I just love history. Someone from 1914 made their own book cover for a basket weaving class. I mean, how perfect is this? Old book, weaving. There's even just little clippings in here. Oh, I love it. Great votive. This was a proud find. I have even been known to offer plants as votives. Here is a lovely, lovely aloe vera that I dedicated to Asclepius. I named her a peony because that's Asclepius' wife. But yeah, I love dedicating plants. I just love it. So I hope this showed you kind of a broad range of what I personally do for votives. They can also be things that you find. You don't have to make them. I mean, obviously I didn't make the aloe vera. That'd be kind of weird. They can be things that you find. They can be little trinkets and you're just like, hey, this is for you. I love votive offerings. They're also the reason why my altars get a little crazy. They're also a good stealthy option, especially if you can't, burn things or offer perishable items, a little trinket. It doesn't even have to be representative of a deity, just as long as it has meaning to you and that meaning is tied to them or just an aspect of them. Do what you want. And then finally, immaterial. Probably the stealthiest option. Probably the best option for those of you who want to be stealthy pagans out there. I'm a professional seamstress, so every day that I go to work, every stitch that I make, I dedicate it. I also play music, as I've mentioned before, specifically early music. So I'll dedicate the tuning of my lute to Apollo, and I'll dedicate every single time I play to the muses. You could also enter some competition as a form of offering. I think video games count. Some traditionalists might not agree, but what is a video game competition but just a virtual competition, which is just a competition, yeah. The thing with offerings is you don't have to work your life around offerings, work your offerings around your life. You're not going to be offering hecatombs of oxen, at least I hope not. You also don't need to do that. You don't need to get a $300 bottle of wine if grape juice is what is accessible to you. I once sung to the sea as an offering. You can lay in your bed, close your eyes, and hum as a form of an offering. As I said in my first video,
the things you need to worship the gods you were born in.
And I truly mean that. Everything you need to start, you already have. Go forth and offer. You've got everything you need to start. I hope this was able to inform and inspire you and sort of demystify the offering process, because it's like the core of Hellenism. Building relationship, rejoicing so they might rejoice, and they rejoice so you might rejoice. And I'm going to leave you with that, and I will see you next time. Bye.